Say you start a business around something you're really passionate about, breeding and growing fruit trees for the North Country climate. Then imagine your kids aren't interested in taking over for you, but someone else is. So you set them up for success. That's what happened at St. Lawrence Nurseries in Potsdam, twice. And that's today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Claxton Hepburn Medical Center, dedicated to providing patient care and regional services to the people of St. Lawrence County. claxtonhepburn.org.
Hi, I'm Amy Feiereisel. It's Thursday, August 1st. First up, it's been a dramatic, dangerous, and damaging summer in many parts of upstate New York. According to National Weather Service data, there were 23 tornadoes recorded in July, nearly double the record set in July of 1992. As WAMC's Samantha Simmons reports for the New York Public News Network, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says the situation warrants more study.
For many communities in upstate New York, the past month has been like a scene out of the movie Twisters.
Speaking at the state's Mesonet Operations Command Center, a network of monitoring systems based at the University at Albany's eTech campus, Schumer says the increased funding would support technology upgrades in research capabilities. The Democrat is seeking $30 million, an increase of $10 million over last year.
We're going to keep seeing terrible storms throughout our region, throughout the country. It's worse than it used to be. And that's why we need to make sure that this Mesonet system isn't just up and running, but state-of-the-art.
Christopher Thorncroft, the center's executive director and director of UAlbany's Atmospheric Sciences Research Center, says Mesonets are a critical part of weather infrastructure in New York and can provide critical information for first responders.
Each site is equipped with automated sensors that measure weather information such as temperature, wind speed, snow, rainfall. We also have cameras that photograph the current conditions, which is invaluable.
Schumer's efforts come at a time when some Republicans are proposing to cut funding for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service and privatize their services. Schumer says recent storms show why it's important to increase funding for weather systems.
These are potentially life and death questions. If you can know better and quicker and more in advance where a tornado will hit and precisely where it will hit, you can save lives.
Samantha Simmons, WAMC News, Albany.
And some North Country homeowners who were impacted by tornadoes and flooding last month can now apply for money to help with repairs. The state program is open to eligible low and moderate income homeowners in Essex, Lewis, and Warren counties. They can apply for up to $50,000 for urgent repairs needed to make their homes safe and habitable. And now for dog owners, if you take your pup across the U.S.-Canada border, the way you do so is changing today. In the past, there were minimal restrictions, but now dog owners will have to prepare in advance. Here's my report. Back in May, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced new canine importation rules to be implemented today, August 1st. What they meant for dog owners crossing the northern border was a new host of rules and paperwork, which would make traveling with pets really difficult.
You have to have your dog microchipped. You've got to have them examined by a veterinarian. You've got to have a certification from a Canadian veterinarian.
That's Gary Douglas from the North Country Chamber of Commerce.
To suddenly spring that on people was just really kind of outrageous. Canadians in particular come here and travel and vacation. They have their boats, campsites, second homes here. Of course, they bring their dogs with them. Many Americans do so in the other direction in return.
Douglas says the CDC rules showed a lack of understanding of the intimate and casual relationship the Canadian-American border regions have with one another.
Instead, have them do things like this periodically that treat the U.S.-Canadian relationship as if it was the U.S. and Zimbabwe or someplace, which is literally what they were doing.
What Douglas is referring to is the reason behind the restrictions, which is to try and combat rabies communication from high-risk rabies countries. The thing is, Canada isn't considered high-risk. It's a low-risk country, like the U.S. After a lot of outcry and lobbying from border legislators and veterinary groups in both countries, the CDC walked back most of the restrictions just last week. But Fido still needs more paperwork than he did before. To cross, dogs must be older than 6 months, appear healthy, be microchipped, have proof of vaccination, and their owner will need to fill out a mostly ceremonial CDC form, which can be completed online the day of travel. Amy Feiereisel, North Country Public Radio. Family businesses are a big and critical part of the North Country's economy. But when kids don't want to take over the family business, what do you do with everything you've built? In the case of a well-known plant nursery in Potsdam, you give it away to your apprentice. Anna Williams-Bergen has this North Country at Work story.
Bill McKentley grew up in Tupper Lake. In his mid-20s, he was back in the area and started reading the horticulture column in the local paper.
From the reading of the article, it sounded like, gee, this guy's local. He's not some national guy. So I wrote to the paper, and they sent me his name and address. He said, yeah, he's right over here in Hewelton. And I went over to meet him.
The columnist was Fred Ashworth, a man in his 70s who'd spent decades breeding fruit trees tough enough to withstand the North Country's chilly climate. He ran St. Lawrence Nurseries, which he'd started back in the early 1920s. McKentley was inspired. He decided to start learning about plants, and Ashworth taught him.
Grafted my first trees in 1972. And I can tell you exactly what variety. It was a Manning Miller pears.
The two began working together, experimenting with different varieties and growing even more trees. At the time, McKentley and his wife Diana were doing odd jobs to make ends meet. They didn't have a lot of money or their own land. Ashworth had a piece of property over in Potsdam, and he let them use it to get started.
He was quite a brilliant guy. He was brilliant and lovely, a wonderful human being, just absolutely wonderful.
A few years into working together, Ashworth gave McKentley and his wife a gift, a big one.
You know, you've been working a lot for me, he says, and I can't afford to pay you. But I figure at 50 cents an hour, you've more than paid for the land over in the Potsdam piece. So he says, I'll cut you a deed. Now we actually had a piece of property.
At that time, St. Lawrence Nurseries wasn't selling a ton of trees. McKentley guessed they made a few $100s a year. And Ashworth didn't depend on the business financially.
My next question to him then was, could you live on the nursery? He said, well, I think if somebody had enough energy and enthusiastic enough, you probably could.
McKentley wanted to try, but Ashworth died unexpectedly in the 1970s.
I was left really devastated.
Ashworth had kids, but they weren't interested in the business, so McKentley took over the nursery.
So I spent about a year just reading and studying everything that I could possibly do to learn where certain mother plants were. I didn't know where they were. You know, they could have been on Fred's land or they could have been somewhere else, but I was able to finally figure all that out.
Diana McKentley eventually quit her job to help run the operation, putting together elaborate catalogs and doing the computer work. And the couple's business grew a lot.
Because our stuff lived. My feeling was if you could grow a quality tree in a tough climate and sell it for a reasonable price, they would be knocking down your doors. And they did.
Bill and Diana McKentley ran St. Lawrence Nurseries for over 30 years. They shipped trees all over the U.S. and even abroad to countries like Iceland and Mongolia. In 2015, the McKentleys decided it was time to retire. But like Ashworth, their kids didn't want to take over. Someone else did. Connor Hardiman worked for the McKentleys for years as a teen. He was away at Ranger School when he heard about their retirement plans.
So all of a sudden, one day, I get a phone call. It's Connor. He said, I want to run the nursery. Is there any way I can do it? And I said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. You're not ready to run the nursery, but you're going to become ready to run the nursery. I'm going to let you run it.
McKentley let Hardiman use his trees, his land, and his tools for about 5 years. Hardiman took on the costs of the business with the deal that he'd buy his own land eventually. But McKentley says some people didn't understand why he would just give the business away.
I can't take it with me. My kids didn't want it. Connor wanted it. So I gave it to him.
Connor's wife, Alyssa, joined the operation. After working off the McKentley's land for a few years, the Hardimans purchased their own property across town. McKentley says it's been a joy to pass things on to the young couple.
They're really special people. Yeah. 2 days ago, he helped me move a couple trees, so he's really good. And Alyssa, she's the best thing that happened to him.
These days, Bill and Diana McKentley are retired. They're still growing fruit trees and a big garden, but they've left the business side of things to the Hardimans. For North Country Public Radio's North Country at Work project, I'm Anna Williams-Bergen in Potsdam.
You can find more news all the time at ncpr.org. Music today came from Pencil Dive in Saratoga Springs and Zoe Knight in Potsdam. I'm Amy Feiereisel, North Country Public Radio.